So y'all, we are here today. My name is Dominque Morgan. I am the executive director of Black and Pink National. May is our 16th birthday. Like May is our birthday month. I remember asking Jason, who's here with me today, like, when did Black and Pink start? He was like, I just know it was May. So we just celebrate all month of May as our birth month. And we are 16, our sweet 16. And today, Jason Lydon, who is the founder of Black and Pink, so many times I have to correct people and let them know I'm very proud of being the executive director and I'm proud of the work we get to do. But we always need to remember and celebrate. There was 13 years of labor that allowed me to be able to come into Black and Pink and work with the team that I have now. So today, our founder, Jason Lydon, Reverend Jason Lydon from Chicago, is with me on live. And I don't think we've ever done anything like this. Have we? Ever done a talking thing?
The two of us together? I don't think
Yeah.
so. It's really nice to get to do so and be with you.
I know.
Share this space and celebrate the work you're doing and celebrate the growth of Black and Pink. What an exciting moment and transformation and change and excitement and growth. It's really beautiful.
Listen, I think it's people assume that we talk all the time, we may see each other all the time, and I'm just like, well, Jason is working a lot and leading incredible work in Chicago and stewarding work at the church, and there are days that I forget to just wash my face, so I'm not always connecting, but we do have those moments where we have a dinner or we get to just kind of meet in a place and we get to connect. And those are some of my favorite moments because I feel like when I look at the history of Black and Pink and what I feel like this long storied history that Black and Pink will have past us, it's really powerful to just hold space with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always exciting for me to see the spaces where even if our approach to it may look or feel different, we find the alignment. And
Absolutely.
where I want to start, I think one of the places that resonates with me the most about that, and I talk about it to this day, is the Lydon House opening here in Omaha, Nebraska, last year in February of 2020. And you said something, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially like there's this, this idea of, abolition and dismantlement, tearing down, burning it down, all those things, but there's an approach to starving the system. Mm-hmm. Making sure our people are free and making sure our people are loved and making sure our people are anchored in community. That's an approach as well to dismantling these harmful systems. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of programs have been launched in my 3 years as ED, and that I feel like that aligns with that approach to starving the system. Jay, like, can you say more about one, like, I don't think we've ever talked about Lydon House Day and opening and the city of Omaha proclaiming a holiday in your name and these other things. So like, what was that day like? And I would love to hear you talk more about this idea of starving the system and what that looks like and the power of that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, being there in that space was overwhelming. I mean, to have something named after me is incredibly humbling, and it's a call to action too. One of the things that I think is so important is to remember that none of this work is over, right? That you all are doing incredible work, and your leadership, Dominque, is amazing. And so too, do I have responsibility if somebody is naming things after me to continue in the struggle for liberation, for abolition, and for the transformation of our society. So it's a reminder to stay grounded, to stay rooted and humble in this work, and to continue to follow the leadership of people most directly affected by these systems, of listening to Black folks, to trans women, to currently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated folks, to figuring out where it is that I fit and sit as a clergy person, as a white person, as a formerly incarcerated person, a survivor, in this. And being in that space and just watching everybody celebrate the opportunities of creating home for somebody, of making sure that there was space to be nurtured and cared for, to ensure that these practices of recidivism end, to make sure that once somebody is out, they stay out, or to make sure that before somebody even is doing a long sentence, that they're navigating space coming out of jail, or they're navigating space coming out of a criminalized community, that having a place to go keeps the prison industrial complex from getting its talons into people. Because one of the things we all, I think, have come to understand is that once somebody gets in, has like a first contact with the system, that immediately kind of sets them up for being in the system for the long term. That one contact is enough to start a long-term pattern of control and violence by the prison industrial complex. So the more we have opportunities to keep people out of that, or reduce the number of times of contact that somebody has with any aspect of the prison industrial complex, police, cops, courts and jails, prisons, the surveillance system and GPS, all of it that we can keep people away and out of, is a way of making it so that then the system has a harder time justifying its existence. And the more that we put power into communities, and the more that communities attain and preserve their own power, particularly Black and brown poor communities, resisting and refusing to allow the prison industrial complex to maintain that control. It's just so beautiful and powerful for resilience and resistance and creating something different.
I remember just the idea of the house in general, and knowing that we needed, and I think maybe I had, like, the last time that we saw each other in DC in like 2018, and it was like December, and I was just like, I had this dream about these houses just all over the country, kind of this, for lack of a better term, like this underground railroad for formerly incarcerated people, to where even if you did not need to stay in the house, if you were in the city and you needed to go get a food, or you needed to just sit with somebody and just talk, or not talk, you just needed to sit and feel safe, these houses would be all across our country. And I remember like making this list of names, and it just kept coming back to you. It just kept coming back to your work. It just kept coming back to, at that time, I had been in the role for about a year and a half. And just being honest, I was like, this has been hell for a year and a half. What was this like for 13 years? To hold this up, to be accountable to community, to feel responsible for the support of thousands and thousands of people, and then aligning that to your own personal goals and your own personal joys and desires. And I also remember you saying something about, like, we do this work and we don't always, and we may never see kind of the outcome of the act we're doing, and we should not be doing the work hoping to see the outcome. Like, we should be doing the work to do the work. You said that so many times. And I was like, this is a chance for there to be an outcome to the work in life, where someone can come and sit in their space. And then when I was like, well, also, like, there's different spaces in the house, when it was like, okay, we want to celebrate Douglas and what Douglas means to Black and Pink, and Black and Pink's history, but Black and Pink in general. I really try to talk about the evolution of Black and Pink. A lot of folks will say, there's such a big difference. I think there's an evolution. I think there's growth. I think there were seeds, and there's work that always been happening. We just were like, well, how do we do this on a larger scale, right? And so I think that's a way that I try to pay respect. But you look at the other names in the house, again, of Douglas, of Kahari, of the inaugural group of board members, Zahara and Mike Cox and Reed and Johannes. There was Tanya. There were incredible people. Zephyr, who's now our deputy director of organizational health. there's a long road to this. I often think about what it was like to take over. What was it like to leave?
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? Like that, because no matter how much pressure it feels like, because I've been thinking about, my succession planning, and on the rough days, I'm like, oh my God, I'll be glad when I'm done. But I also am like, well, what would I really do if I, what would my days really look like? So what is that? What was that like to leave and to kind of start over in Chicago?
Yeah. Well, it was an incredibly intentional leaving. I announced I was leaving 2 years before I did. So it was at our first national gathering when we met that I told folks that my intention was to step down within 2 years, with the idea of bringing in and lifting up and supporting Black leadership and other people of color leadership within the organization. That as a formerly incarcerated person, but as a white person leading an organization that was primarily made up of people of color, and specifically Black folks affected by incarceration, it didn't make sense for me to remain at the helm of the organization. And so it was a 2-year process of creating a transition team, of envisioning and imagining what would happen and what that would be like, while things didn't go exactly as we dreamed about how that transition would happen. The leaving part on my end, was so many things. I knew that I needed to be done. That it's really important for founders to make space and make way for new leaders. That I have been part of other organizations where the founder is in charge 30 years later, and it just doesn't feel like a healthy way of maintaining an organization. That abolition and Black and Pink and visions of queer, trans, and HIV positive folks resisting the violence of the prison industrial complex exists in so many different ways. And I don't need to be the person who is in front of the largest organization doing that work. And I also was incredibly thankful for the years I got to do that work. And it is, as you said, it is exhausting work. And it is, many, many hours of, particularly with folks inside, just lots of banging your head against the wall and trying really hard to secure freedom for people, or even moments of freedom, or reducing torture, and educating people and building movements together. That to kind of step away from that, I feel like was important in order to nurture new ideas and to make space for other strategies, and to step back and to know that I had an incredible opportunity to give life to this organization. And then so many, many people were vital in that creation story, that then it was time for me, also very specifically to return to parish ministry. That I missed being in the church, and knew that it would take some time to get back there, but was ready to return to doing explicitly faith-based work. Whereas Black and Pink for me was always a ministry, but done in a way, in a secular organization. And there was a need for me to return to my Unitarian Universalist roots as well.
And there's a question from, I think, from Facebook, and they asked, like, how did you start Black and Pink? And I also just realized that I think everybody is steeped in Black and Pink every day and knows all the history that I know. Can you kind of give us a snapshot of the roots and the seed of BMP 16 years ago?
Yeah. The key thing was, after I got out of prison, specifically out of Fort Devens, once I was out of Devens, I wanted to keep in touch with folks that I've been locked up with. Douglas Rogers, a key one who we had been cellies together, and he looked out for me, I was looking out for him. And neither of us were out to each other exactly about our sexuality while we were inside. And there was another person, Darnell, who I was also close with inside. We also weren't particularly out, but it's one of those things where like, we're not talking about it, but we all kind of hang out and we know you're gay, I'm gay, whatever. But we're just kind of keeping things quiet, I guess. The way I kept in touch just with letters was the beginning. And while doing so, Douglas and Darnell both were checking in with other guys and saying, if you write to Jason, he'll write back to you. And so then I was writing with a few more people from Devon's. And then there was an organization called Brothers Behind Bars that was based out of the Radical Fairies, kind of a queer radical organization in Tennessee. And they had a list of gay men, bisexual men, and trans women who were incarcerated in Massachusetts. And so then I just started writing to folks who were locked up in Massachusetts to say, hey, what's going on? I'm Jason, just trying to get connected with people, see what's going on for you. Because when I had gotten out, I reached out to Lambda Legal, the task force, HRC, to be like, hey, let me tell you about the horrific things that are going inside and affecting our people. Let me tell you about what was going on in the queer segregated cells in Muskogee County Jail, where people had to trade sex in order to get access to HIV medication. Let me tell you about the sexual violence that I experienced at the hands of prison guards. Let me tell you about the horrific violence and racialized violence that's happening against Black and brown queer and trans folks in Georgia. And they were like, no thanks. Not really talking about that. Not really interested. We're really focused on marriage, and these issues are not a priority for us. It's interesting how almost all of those organizations now are doing some amount of criminal justice work. It's funny, when the money shows up, all of a sudden these organizations seem to, step up. That said, I would say that I actually think that the movement also impacted that too. The movement of which Black and Pink was a key part of, along with TGIJP, TJLP, Sylvia Rivera Law Project, the Hearts on a Wire Collective, so many folks who started pushing these mainstream organizations, and then folks within those mainstream organizations who had always been there, but being silent, saying, hey, we need to pay attention to what's going on. And not just look at what affects wealthy, white, cis gays and lesbians. Let's look more broadly. And so Black and Pink really began with me writing to folks and then it being too many. Because, once your address gets in there, folks are like, oh, okay. So people just start writing, and it got to the point where I was writing to about 35-ish people. And I was like, I love you all. I am 22 years old and trying to party a little bit. I was still drinking at that time, work, go on dates, do whatever it was I was doing with my life. Writing with 35 people was going to be too much. So I made this big dinner and invited my friends over and said, isn't this big dinner really beautiful? Don't you want some? And they're like, yes, this is so great. Thank you. I was like, perfect. Well, you can have some if you write letters to these prisoners. And that was really the beginning of people saying, oh, okay, let's write about this. Let's write to these folks. Let's keep this going. And so that was the early start. And then another friend of mine, Jonathan, said, well, it seems unrealistic that you can just rely on your friends to do this. How about we make a website? And that's when Black and Pink first got its name. It's when it first got a website. And when, through the years that came, there was just so much learning of, oh, you probably shouldn't just list everyone's name and address right on the page. Maybe we have to have a process around this. And then, different folks had wisdom and came in and shaped the organization, where I feel like I had a particular vision at a particular time, and I had the framework of abolition that was always central to Black and Pink from the get-go, that we were doing the work to not make prettier gay prisons, that we weren't just trying to make things better for queer folks inside, or make sure that only that, there was good areas for LGBT folks and everyone else was going to suffer. That the idea was, no, we use a LGBTQ and HIV specific lens to look at the prison industrial complex to fight for liberation for everybody. And that we're using our approach to make sure that people are building power amongst those who had constantly been sidelined. From the kind of mainstream anti-prison movement, not much attention to LGBTQ folks and people living with HIV. And then certainly from the LGBTQ and HIV movement, not paying attention to criminalized folks. So that was some of the early days of just, lots of pulling things together whenever possible.
What I love about the early days that I hope still shows today is that it was centered on people, right? People power, supporting other people, community. And I was on a panel the other day and I just had this moment where, allyship and there's so many words about people being engaged in activity together, but I use solidarity a lot. And I think solidarity to me feels like forever, right? That we're in this for the long haul. There's just some time to it, and like that's inherent to solidarity efforts. And the idea that we don't throw people away, that we're always pushing towards this sort of community experience that we know is possible, that may seem really hard in that moment, but it's important. When I think about the roots of Black and Pink, I feel like that's one of the charges that I'm held to also is, like Dominique, like you have to push that forward no matter what new thing you build. Like, how are we centering our people in it? Even when it seems hard. And I think that's when we've been able to accomplish that, those are the things that I'm most proud of in my time as ED. Nicole from Facebook asks, what do we see abolition organizing moving in terms of building new coalitions or connections in social justice work? So I guess kind of what do we see as the trends around abolition in coalition building and work now?
What would you say? I'd be curious about your thoughts.
I think it's very much what you said around the large organizations that did not prioritize system impacted, formerly and currently incarcerated folks 10 years ago. I would not necessarily say they prioritize us now. However, with the access and name they have, they're being funded to add us to the equation. And what I feel is true is when, formerly incarcerated is on a long list of other oppressed identities, it's going to be the last one that people turn to. It's going to be the last space that people try to stretch their work to include. And if it is included, then people who are on the sex offense registry and other things like that are left out. Mm-hmm. It's not as expansive as we know it needs to be to center queer and trans GNC folks who have been impacted by the carceral state. That being said, those are like the largest times that we're seeing it, where these organizations have the staff, have the funding to build this huge coalition. And we're meeting once a month and we're having conversations, but I don't feel like we're seeing the movement forward that we should be seeing. Mm-hmm. What I believe is the next phase is what we saw last summer, is when young folks, young Black folks, young brown folks, young queer folks, young folks of all experiences were like, we're tired of this. We're not going to wait for you all to give us space to be in, to lead. This is our lives. We deserve to be in this. And we would be fooling ourselves to think that, again, these measures we're seeing aren't the sort of relief we deserve. But to see spaces where police funding is being moved, to see spaces where young folks are talking about abolition and doing teach-ins and talking about in Nebraska, you know what I'm saying? I didn't hear about abolition until I met Jason Lydon. Like that's the first time I heard that word. There's kids just, all over. That's because of them. So I think the trend needs to be decentering adults and centering young people, and us doing the work to support them and equip them with whatever they need to activate the change that they're telling us is necessary. Because inherently, as we get older, there's more access and privilege just because we're older people. Now there reaches an age where that reduces, but between like 30 and 50, like we hold a lot of the weight. And so I think that's what I'm trying to do. I think that's one of the ideas around Opportunity Campus was, yes, we definitely wanted to make sure that young folks are housed and have space. But the larger visions are around building a school, around creating safe spaces for education, around talking about abolition around the youth experience, right? Because many of us don't think that young people should be wielding their autonomy in a way that we aren't in charge of. Comprehensive sex education being centered in that. So I think that's the trend, and that's what I'm seeking to support. Even when you see me work with organizations, it's usually the young people at the org or like an advocates for youth, where you've got these powerful young Black folks who are doing work. That's what I'm trying to pour into. But yeah, I think there's large stuff. Get information where you can. Get, and of course, social kind of cachet is important. So sometimes you got to go that stuff just so people know your names. Like that's just the politics of it, the ambient impact of the nonprofit industrial complex, if you will. But get into these kids, get into these young people, get into these babies, and they're gonna have you really doing some stuff that you know is going to really root and bring some great change.
I love that.
Yeah. That's my thoughts. What do you think? You in Chicago, baby, because Chicago, baby, listen, the girls don't play.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing in the city of watching young people in particular doing amazing work, educating each other, really going after the work of defunding the police, really building with one another. Good Kids Mad City is an amazing organization of young people trying so hard to come up with the Peace Book resources to really address gun violence that's happening from an abolitionist perspective, of knowing that, you know, the police only care sometimes. They only show up after shootings are happening. They refuse to give people the actual resources they need to survive, and trusting Black young people to know the best ways to take care of one another. And so it's been amazing to watch the organizing happening and the power building happening across organization and across young people just kind of building themselves up and taking over the streets and making demands, and watching cross-race work happen, watching in particular solidarity around Black, Brown, Indigenous young people, whether it was the effort to tear down the Columbus statue and the ways young people showed up and stood up and rose up to demand space and land to be returned to Indigenous people, and to stop celebrating a, you know, serial rapist and colonizer of the man that is Columbus, who gets celebrated for the vile aspects of settler colonialism that he brought with him, and watching young people connect that to why that is related to police violence in the city today, how settler colonialism, chattel slavery, the border, all of these things are interconnected and are all part of the carceral state, because the function of the state is to be a punishing system that is rooted in anti-Blackness, is rooted in theft of land, is rooted in creating perpetual foreigners and deciding who gets to be allowed and not, and it's all through violence and punishment. And so the only solution to any of that is abolition. And so watching young people come together and give each other answers and come up with harder questions, and then wondering, okay, well, what do we do when violence does happen in our communities, and how do we deal with it? And so I think one of the types of coalitions that I'm so curious about them continuing to grow is how we center survivors of intimate partner abuse and survivors of sexual violence and survivors of other interpersonal violence, gun violence, in the leadership of abolitionists, because that has been happening throughout abolitionist history, but it doesn't get talked about in the same way that I think it often needs to. We have people like Angela Davis, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Mariam Kaba, many of whom come out of an anti-violence movement, in particular Mariam Kaba coming out of the domestic violence movement and then into abolition with the idea that, oh, policing and incarceration don't end interpersonal violence. It's just not what it does. We might watch violence shift and move, but we do not watch violence end or get reduced by the existence of policing or incarceration. And so I feel like one of the things that's really exciting watching young people and watching intergenerational relationships and collaboration happen is the opportunities to say, okay, what have people tried in the past? And to see the ways of reform as being part of a vicious cycle of expanding the prison industrial complex, that we come up with this reform idea, it gets incorporated into the system and then is used to create violence. Probation has done that, GPS has done that on people's the ankle bracelets, bail bond, that structure, these ideas were all reforms to reduce the harm, but actually end up perpetuating the harm of the system in and of itself. And so I feel like what's so exciting about doing this work intergenerationally is that folks who have been doing things for a long time can share, oh, let me tell you about this time when, so for instance, in Massachusetts, we were working on the bill to end the background checks on applications for folks to get jobs, and to make it so that people could steal their records after, I think it was 5 years if it was a misdemeanor and 10 years if it was a felony. And we were doing all this kind of reform work, trying to make these changes in the state. And as we were going about it, we discovered that the legislators were only going to be willing to make some of these changes if we simultaneously expanded the sex offender registry, if we made things worse for homeless folks who had to register, that the only way they were going to make changes is if we threw somebody else under the bus. And so Black and Pink at that time was mostly Massachusetts based. And so we said, we can't support this effort anymore because it's coming at the expense of others. And one of the things we've also now seen is that even the ban the box concept, which makes a lot of sense, it seems like such a good idea to say, yes, we shouldn't be asking people about their criminal history, but there's all this research coming out of the Williams Institute that says we've actually seen places just increase their racial discrimination in places that have banned the box. And so because we're not saying that not only should you not hire somebody because they're formerly incarcerated, actually, you should ask people if they're formerly incarcerated, because you should prioritize hiring people who have been system impacted, because we are trying to end a vicious cycle of sending people back to prison. And that under capitalism as it exists today, we have to figure out navigating the labor market. And so until we, simultaneously end capitalism, which is essential for abolition, then we have to figure out how to be more explicit in supporting and actively working with formerly incarcerated people, rather than doing things like say, oh, don't look at that. It's like, no, quite the opposite. We need affirmative hiring practices for folks who've been affected.
I think that it's what I see people struggle with, and what I struggled with in the beginning of like this kind of journey in abolition, is you want to take the course and kind of graduate. And like, I get it. I know it's done. It's cool. Plug and play. All right. I get it. Like, just don't treat people like crap. And then you just realize you literally have to undo most things you know. You have to rewire your brain. You have to undo some of the ways of knowing and gifts that maybe your family or loved ones and your community has given to you. And it feels like you have to reestablish every value, or make sure that you're affirming them. And for me, I think it was a gift, because there was a moment I realized that so much of what I know, what I thought I knew, or how I lived, was based on what I learned growing up in the system. And as much as I thought that I hadn't allowed them to really offer me their perspectives, climate is climate, right? And so like that's been a huge gift, to kind of go through and do an inventory about like, girl, who are you? And that was big. And so I just think that's so powerful. And I think it's also powerful that young folks are doing that at 15 and 16. You know what I'm saying? At 38, it's a, you know, at 39 now, it's a bit of a heavy load sometimes. I'm like, oh Lord, it's been about 40 years of navigating the world this way. I think it's beautiful how much more time young folks will get being steeped in this sort of lived experience. That's what I think is just beautiful. Brandy was talking about perspective, and she said, what did you learn about during your journey that you applied to creating equity and representation in leadership across industries? Like the way that you thought about stepping away from Black and Pink in your work.
Sure. I feel like it's still a learning process. I think that when stepping away from Black and Pink in the immediate transition, there was not enough support in some ways for folks coming in, not enough leadership development maybe for folks. And an idea of trying to figure out how we equip people for success. I think that's one of my biggest questions around what transitioning leadership means. That the nonprofit industrial complex is a system designed through white supremacy and capitalism to maintain certain types of systems, and that trying to operate in non-traditional ways within that structure can be at times a recipe for disaster. That there's a desire to utilize the kind of tool of a 501c3 to, in my opinion, kind of extract resources from the wealthy through foundations to say, this isn't really your money anyway. And so, you know, the idea is to figure out how we work the system that is the foundation-based system, which was designed inherently so that wealthy people could donate money instead of pay higher taxes, and so that they end up having more control over where their money goes and they get to continue manipulating everything. And so to try to figure out how to work that system from the other side is incredibly difficult. One of the stories, this doesn't exactly match with the question, but I think is related, is that in Boston years ago, there were a group of young people or organizations of young people who all were competing for the same funds from the same foundation. And the same foundation was deciding all the time how each organization would get their funds. And this group, these young people's organizations decided, wait a minute, we all know we're all applying to the same foundation for the same bucket of money. Why don't we, instead of applying, inform them about how they should be distributing that money? Because they exist, they claim to exist for the function of funding and resourcing our work. So why is it that they get to then dictate the process? No, it should be those who are doing the work who dictate the process. And so they essentially created like a grantee union for 1 year where they reached out to the foundation and said, this is how we believe you should resource these organizations. Here's how we're collaborating. This is the work that's being done. And we are no longer writing these long ass applications that are not effective for us or any of the work that we're doing. They just serve you and your purposes, and that's not serving the purpose of liberation. And so it was beautiful to just watch these youth-led organizations decide this is how it's going to go. And they managed with that one cycle. It didn't stick, but with that one cycle, we're able to really have some control and power. And so it's one of the things that I wonder about when we talk about shifting power, getting those of us who come, like for myself as a white person, as somebody who has institutional education, that as we move out of leadership, how are we equipping folks with the tools to be successful to navigate the system? And also, how do we also figure out, okay, if I'm going to be leaving the system, how do I also challenge it as I am leaving to make sure that folks who are coming up behind me are able to do things in the way that they do things, not that they have to do things in the same way that I was doing something, but are figuring out new ways, and that change and transformation in an organization is a good thing, and that new ideas and new structures and new ways of being are good, that we have principles that remain the same. We have ideologies often that will remain the same, but that the actual work is intended to shift based on the experiences of those who are coming in to new leadership, and that we have, as different organizations, the ability to adapt and follow new leadership because it's exciting and creates opportunities for growth. And so I hope that that's one of the things that, like, as Adrienne Marie Brown talks about, emergent strategy, right? So if we are listening to the opportunities that come about, and if we are centering folks who know the most about the experiences of these systems of violence, then we know as institutions how to adapt and be more like plants, where we grow in different ways, and we figure out where the light is, and we figure out where the nutrients are, and we are reaching into that, instead of trying to say, okay, well, this is the way we've done it, we're going to grow as a straight pole forever like this. That we need to figure out how to support adaptation.
What is always helpful for me is this idea of like really trying to weaponize the system against the system. And I don't always win, but I really go back to my time as being a young kid hustling on the streets. It's like, really, it's like, how do I flip this money? Mm-hmm. How do I get this money from these white folks to give to my people? And how can we remove as many barriers as possible? And, last year with our COVID response fund, and we absolutely modeled our fund after the COVID response fund from the transgender district, led by Aria Saeed, and then the program that was developed by House of Tulip, Mariah Moore, and those incredible folks down there working. It was just like, yo, like they're giving money directly back to people. Why can't we be doing that? And there was moments where, these funding, these foundations, these spaces were giving us these funds, and it was just exciting to know that like tomorrow it's all going out via Cash App. It's all going back to people. Yeah. And it's also been really interesting to have these conversations with those funders in their post-COVID world, where it's like, well, most folks are not even thinking that there's a post-COVID world that is even possible. To want to have questions about data and all those things. And I'm like, all I can tell you is that the people who had the need got what they needed, or got what we could give them towards that need. That's the data I can offer you. And it's been powerful to have those conversations with foundations. I recently joined the CJI circle, and I'm hoping I can do more work with that. And I'm a trans justice funding fellow this year, right? Like this space of, it's to work on the ground. It's, I think, development of programming and doing that in ways that have never been done before. But where are these coins coming from? And until we can like get rid of having to kind of fund our work through those systems completely, how can we shift those policies and that approach? I want to give a shout out to Fatima from our LA chapter, a longtime Black in Pink member, has written for Black in Pink when she was inside, and does amazing policy work in Los Angeles, in California, and a part of our formerly incarcerated subgroup with the National LGBT Criminal Working Group. And she's starting her Fatima Speaks Mutual Aid Foundation. So y'all make sure that you go to Fatima's Facebook, and I know she has a like page and a LinkedIn page, and find out how y'all can engage with Fatima and support the powerful work led by a really powerful and incredible Black trans woman. So we have 15 minutes left. 16 years, did you think Black in Pink would be, chugging along after all this time?
I couldn't have imagined Black in Pink certainly not doing the things that you have kind of created and made happen. None of that was ever really in my imagination. It's so exciting to watch you do the things that you're doing. I remember flirting with the idea of a reentry house in Boston at one point, and just being like, that's wait, our budget was, at the max when I was there, it was I think $300,000, $250,000 when I was leaving. And we started with, Black and Pink was funded criminally. Like, it was stolen, like everything was stolen. Like all of the early newsletters were stolen copies. Like things were funded by folks, like early days were funded by folks who stole things from work, or there was a time when we had a group of folks who we each took a month of being responsible for paying for the newspaper. And there were folks who paid for the newspaper with the whatever criminalized economy that they were part of. And that was how they contributed to make the newspaper happen. And then people were getting together in coffee shops to fold things and stuff things, and just it's countless hours of volunteer time, like literally probably thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours of human power going into getting newsletters to people that then hundreds of them would get rejected, and then we had to go through those again. The ways of building throughout the years were, I'm a scrappy guy. So it was a scrappy kind of project. It was, let's like, we don't have enough money to pay me. Okay, I'm gonna live somewhere. I'm gonna move into a place where I can live for $100 and figure out how to do this. And that had, aspects of like privilege of what it meant to be a white cisgender gay man, and like what I was able to do. And so, I understand the ways in which doing that sets people up in the long term of not being as resourced as they need to be as staff. And the organization didn't have any money. And so it was like that combination of, we don't have any money. Yes, I deserve to get paid a real salary, but that doesn't exist yet. The work needs to be done. So what are we gonna do? And so it's just kind of a constant, trying to figure things out, lots of things falling through the cracks. When I went to divinity school, there was a year where Black and Pink did pretty much nothing in 2008. Black and Pink was not very functional. We did our newsletter, but not much other than that. And it was too often relied on me, despite us having lots of volunteers. I think one of the challenges of being founded by somebody and being founded by a very outspoken abolitionist with a lot of strong opinions, and by a white person and a cis dude, there were dynamics at play that were problematic at times in terms of kind of folks not knowing, well, if that's not what Jason would do, maybe we shouldn't do it. And also me not being able to do things because I was working full time and going to school full time. So, there's lots of aspects of Black and Pink's growth that included a lot of growing pains of trying to figure out where we fit and what was right and how to be doing work in a liberatory way and how to center those who are most affected. And there are lots of attempts, lots of failures, lots of attempts, lots of failures, lots of learning and growing and shifting and changing. And so when I look at what it is now as a, multi-million-dollar organization and what you've been able to do, it is so different and beautiful and powerful, and your leadership is inspiring and exciting and gives life to so many more people and gives life to so many new projects and ensures more victories towards abolition. That we are in this, like, while I absolutely remember saying you don't get many wins, but we are in it to win. Like, that's why we do it, to secure freedom and liberation materially for our people, that people are suffering and dying, being tortured, being killed by the system. And so all of what we do is about making sure that that does not happen. And so it makes sense to me that you've been able to grow this in really beautiful ways because you're fierce as fuck. And like this, that the way that your vision and leadership comes in is so powerful and important. And that there is, the movement also is ready in so many ways that it wasn't once before. That when Black and Pink was at its early stages talking about abolition, people weren't talking about abolition very much. It was a very small thing that Critical Resistance was talking about and a few other organizations. But now, Ruth Wilson Gilmore's in the New York Times talking about it. The best New York Times bestseller is Mariam Kaba's book about abolition. We are in a different time. And so it's so exciting to me to have been part of helping create that, and then to watch you lead and build on it and create it in new ways is just an overwhelming joy.
Well, thank you. I don't know, like I've said this before. I think that, in my incarceration, like it was navigating the entire space using she and her pronouns, and coming home, it was this very scary place of feeling like how I showed up just wasn't right. And honestly, it was Black and Pink, like being able to see people like Zahara. I'll never forget that first day I met Zahara Green. I will never forget that day. Literally, like one of the most beautiful things I had ever seen in my life. Walking into, I don't know if you remember that day, we had our working group meeting in DC, and I got lost because I didn't realize DC has streets that have the same names in different parts of DC, and you're just supposed to know that's the case. So I'm late. I'm flying from Nebraska, which meant back then you had to take 3 planes to get to DC out of Nebraska. And walking in and seeing this room of formerly incarcerated people and realizing that incarceration didn't mean that I could not be great. And looking around this room and seeing people that are awesome in so many different ways, but at the end of the day, they're dope. And that gift just shifted my life in ways unknown. And this work, some days, yes, the work is the work. But at the same time, I don't believe I would be in this space, in my body, in my mind, if I wouldn't have had the freedom of being able to lead Black and Pink. There was a lot of freedom and understanding that my transition would not stop me from my livelihood, would not instantly make me lose community. All those things that I see people navigate every day when they're trying to fight through establishing their own safety and their own livelihood versus their own self. That's what people can battle with. And so that's a gift that I can't thank you enough for. I can't thank our Black and Pink community enough for. And you mentioned before, it hasn't always been perfect. It's not going to be perfect because it's people stuff. When it's perfect, it's usually systemed, and that means that people have been silenced. That means that it's repetition, it's plug and play. We don't do anything, as Tina said, we like it rough. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't do it easy around here, and I'm proud of that. Nick asked, what's a dream that we have for Black and Pink in the next 16 years? I would say in the next 16 years that, well, Andrew is probably just Andrew Aleman, who is our director of people power and national partnerships. Like his hands, his ears, his brain is probably itching on what I'm about to say, because anything that I think of, like he's like, oh, that's more work for me. Dusty will be like, oh, that's more work for me. I really want us to be expressly global. Looking at the work that Nala Simone is doing with Black trans women in Africa, and some of the things I saw in just an hour conversation with her of the active, prolific erasure of their lives. Like we're watching intense erasure of Black trans women in America, but there are no words for what this Black trans woman is holding up from New York, trying to support our sisters and our family over there. And I see us as an authority, and we may not be like within the larger LGBTQ plus bubble. We would not be looking at our budget isn't HRCs or our budget isn't the task force, but in the abolition bubble, we are the HRC, we are the task force, in the mindset that we are a multi-million-dollar agency. We do have 22 staff members and 1 full-time position currently posted. Y'all apply for that because we need a new program director. I'm program manager for national. Like, so what are we doing with our access and our name? What are we doing with that people want to call us and send us money that we didn't ask for? How are we getting that back out there to our people? Let's not drink that Kool-Aid. Let's not rest on our laurels. And America has its issues, but if we're talking about the most oppressed and we talk about we center the most oppressed, we need to expand our reach. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be controlling the process. It just means we need to be aware. And what I hope in the next 16 years is that there are Black and Pink chapters all across the globe, and that people, queer formerly incarcerated people, will receive that feeling that I get every day of, I'm not by myself. That my story isn't a singular story. I'm not odd. I'm not different. I didn't deserve what happened to me. That I don't deserve more than what I have. That I'm great, and I deserve to make my definition of my greatness. And I have people who care about my greatness, and they're going to be engaged with me in accessing that. Like, that's what the next 16 years needs to look like. And there's somebody who is young and Black and just sickening leading it, that I'm doing the work to where, you know, they can come in and like hop in. I joke with Jason, like Jason is like, you know, like, you know, the first captain on Star Trek, and then Picard comes in, you know, that's the Captain Kirk moment. Picard comes in, and it took a long time for people to like, the next generation, girl, what's the next generation? And now there's all these iterations of Star Trek, and it's awesome, and it's different, and there's a world. And that's what I hope, is that we are also setting the table for young folks to not have to wait in line, to not have to feel like they have to be held back or receive permission, that we're creating an agency that Black and brown folks, the table is not only set for, like there's not only a place at the table, it was set for them, it was meant for them, and we all eating together, but they are centered in it. So I'm hoping in the next years, because I'm on my downturn of like, you know, 3 years is I've told everybody, and that scares them a little bit, but I'm like, yo, at that point, it'll be 6 years here at BMP. And me figuring, you know, me being on a beach with somebody fanning me with a banana leaf is my goal. And at, you know, at that point, and then come back and see how I fit into the work. What would you love to see Black and Pink doing 16 years from now, Jason?
You know, that all sounds really beautiful. What would I like to see? I could imagine things like chapters in different cities where folks are just figuring out how to close down jails and prisons, figuring out how to say, okay, we created these great programs. We've been running this shit for a while. Things have been going good over here. It is time to shut down Cook County Jail. We've ended cash bail. We don't need to be detaining people pre-trial ever again. So let's shut down every county jail and just go county by county to see Black and Pink be a leader in physically closing down prisons and jails. That's what I would love to see. That I'd love to see the localized work of securing victories that highlight the ways that that Black and Pink has starved the system, to then say, okay, well, now we're going to put these buildings into the graveyards that they deserve to be in.
That is dope. And that just made me think like I don't know. I think that, you know, we have a strategic organizational plan, but I've been thinking about lately, like what's our app, like what's the SWOT analysis and our strategic plan, like for Black and Pink, to be clear about how we're taking pieces of the work to get us to that space, right? Like what are the bodies, what's happening, and especially being really excited about new chapters about to come in the summertime, and being, you know, supported by our incredible advocacy department. Because it's also very true for me that there's like everybody's passion work is going to look different, and that's awesome. And we need to be making sure that they are seen and supported and lifted in that. And so it's just a bunch of opportunity. It's a bunch of opportunity, and it's hard work, but it's opportunity. And that's what excites me. is that there's the possibility. No one can tell me what's not possible. 4 years ago, 3 years ago, the end of 2017, where we were compared to where we are now, no one can tell me what's not possible. And so that's what I am thankful for. I just, Jason, I love you. I don't get to say that to you all the time. I am, you're so humble and you are so, calm about things, but there's nothing that can be taken from the fact that you started something that has changed so many lives, and not the least life mine. And that is something that I think all of us try to do. So I will do my best to continue to lift your name in the spirit of respect and love, because I think we talk about like this space of like whiteness in the work, but it's something special about you and BMP, and I feel there's something special about our relationship, and just how this happened. I didn't even want to apply for this job. I'm like, this ain't for me. I need to stay in Omaha. And then, a few months later, the universe was like, girl, this is for you.
Yep.
So I'm thankful. I'm so excited that your baby, our baby now, is turning 16.
Yes.
I'm excited what's to come. And it's just important. I just want to tell you all that there is incredible work happening in Chicago. There is a Black and Pink Chicago chapter. You can go to our Black and Pink website and look up the chapter, but also within the church spaces that Jason is involved in Chicago. There's incredible work happening there. So if you're there physically, engage. There's also so many incredible virtual options that have been manifested over the last year to engage. Opportunity Campus is our current endeavor. We do have the land, and the land and the building, but we're in a $2 million capital campaign to build the space that we, young people, deserve. Built in the vision of young people. And so make sure y'all engage in that. And we have a few weeks left of May, or maybe this is the last week of May, Lord, where am I at? But there's more stuff coming, and I'm gonna try to do some surprise shenanigans and things, just because that's just what we do around here. But congratulations, Jason, on 16 years of BMP. And thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much. It's a joy. Right.
Well, y'all make sure y'all follow Jason, engage in his work. And we will, we love to pop up on Facebook and have some talks with y'all.